day and welcome to California. It is known as the Golden State. Why? Because for the most part it is an area of abundant sunshine, but also because gold was discovered there. It is a place that I know well. Early in my career, I was a microelectronics engineer and had a number of contracts both in Southern and Northern California. In addition, Carol and I have vacationed there a number of times. Today, if you look at the red line in this outline of California, we're going to be doing a circle tour. We're not going to be seeing all parts of the states, but pretty good highlights of most of the state. We're going to begin down south in San Diego, head up along the coast to San Francisco, and then out to the Sierra Nevada mountains, and then back down to Los Angeles. The name California was derived from a mythical Spanish island. And when the Spanish explorers originally arrived in California, they thought it was that island. Today, California is the most populous state in the United States, with a population of approximately 40 million people. But it's not the largest state in terms of area. It is the third largest state. Plus, over 1/2 of the land in California is owned by the federal government. It is a very geologically diverse state with 840-mile-long coastline, deserts, and 41 mountains exceeding 10,000 feet in height. As I say, we're going to begin in San Diego. This is the Mission Basilica San Diego. It was the first Franciscan mission in California, founded in 1769 by a Spanish friar. This is not the original building, but it is the site of where the original building was built. Over the years, a number of different buildings have gone through changes. The current chapel dates back to 1868. The Vatican has designated it as a minor basilica. Good old Google Earth picture of the San Diego area. Mountains out to the east and lots of population around the bay. Today we will be visiting several areas. San Diego downtown, where that square is, yellow square, a slip of land called Point Loma, which is very beautiful. And one of the things that most people don't think about is the closeness of San Diego to Mexico. That yellow line down below is the border with Mexico. Welcome to the skyline of San Diego. The business district all the way out in the far parts of the picture, or actually the middle to top. The two oval structures, and then you wouldn't recognize it, but there's a runway there. That is the U.S. Naval Station, San Diego. And then this is the main shipping channel coming into a very, very deep bay. For many years, the U.S. Navy has been the cornerstone of the area's economy. But that has become less and less important. The Navy has a big presence in San Diego. But today it is becoming more of a technology center. Flying into San Diego Commercial Airport is always a challenge. It's one of the airports that pilots do not like. Why? Because you fly in between some not islands, but hills. And when you do, if you look out of the plane parallel to where you are, and you're still in the air, you can look at people on their front porches. It's a little unnerving the first time you fly into San Diego Airport. San Diego has some beautiful buildings, but what I always loved was the fact that you had parkland going almost all the way around what we would call the inner harbor. Very, very beautiful, a lovely place to walk, and the weather is delightful there most of the year. Great eateries. Of course, you would think with its closeness to Mexico that it has a lot of Spanish food. I once went to a restaurant and ordered tacos. I expected I would get the small little tacos. No, I got this thing that looked about the size of a pizza, except it was folded over. You had to cut it in pieces in order to eat it. Washington has its pandas, but San Diego was the first zoo to be able to breed pandas. I'm usually not a person that loves seeing animals held in captivity, but San Diego Zoo is certainly a place worth visiting. This is Point Loma, the main shipping channel going in, as you saw in a previous picture, and that brownish strip of land is the Naval Air Station. There is a lighthouse up on the top of Point Loma, but it has some beautiful views. Again, this is looking back towards downtown San Diego, the Naval Air Station in the foreground. But what amazed me is those mountains. They're snow-covered. In its total history, or at least the history is recorded in weather, San Diego has only had snow 5 times in its history, and it has never accumulated. So the snow, well, you can see some mountains off to the left of this slide. No snow. That's California. The mountains with the snow in the background are located in Mexico. I was pretty naive when I first went there. I never thought of Mexico having mountains, nonetheless, snow-covered mountains. I have since realized my mistake. We move to the border. With all the hype about walls and so on and so forth along the Mexican border, this is a typical summer day. Americans going south into Mexico, and if you look where to see the picture going to the left, Mexicans coming into the United States. A lot of the jobs in San Diego are highly dependent upon what are called day workers that come across from Tijuana into San Diego to do their jobs and then go back home at night. This is the border. No, this is not Trump's wall. This is the existing border wall. San Diego is this barren, or California is this barren land right to the right of the picture, and the left is Tijuana, Mexico. That wall extends, it's a barbed wire wall, extends out into the ocean. And as you can see, Tijuana, the city of Mexico, comes right up to the wall. The stadium there is in Mexico and Tijuana. And San Diego, go down there to that stadium at times. We're now going to move north from San Diego along Interstate 5. We're going to go to Camp Pendleton, Santa Clemente, Newport, and then Los Angeles, or as they like to call it, LA. For those of you here at CLV, some are in the Marine Corps, some of you might be familiar with Camp Pendleton, major Marine Corps base on the West Coast, and particularly has a specialty in amphibious warfare and training recruits or new Marine personnel in the art of maneuvering amphibious vessels. This is President Nixon's compound at San Clemente. Not a bad little place to live. If you remember, this was his summer White House, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. Come to Newport Beach. Many of you probably have never heard of Newport Beach, but it's part of Orange County. Orange County is probably one of the richest counties in the United States. It is a place that I have spent a lot of time. You see a white building off there to the right. It was the headquarters or a facility of Collins Radio, and I had contracts there and spent numerous visits there, at least 6 to 7 a year. This is the harbor off to the left of Newport Beach. It's a rich place because we think about movie stars and TV stars and so on living up near Los Angeles and in Beverly Hills. Well, John Wayne was the first to come down here and build a house. And he liked it because he had a big boat that he moored here in Newport Beach. But all of a sudden, people started coming down. And so a lot of famous people live, not necessarily where this picture is, but more to the right of this picture. It is a place that I learned not to go swimming in the Pacific Ocean. You notice in the left part of the picture, there is a very, very nice beach. I was out there once in July, and I brought my swimming trunks along, and I decided in the afternoon that I would go out for a swim. So I drove out to the beach, waded down and into the water. As a kid, I used to go swimming in Maine, and that water was freezing in Maine, as many of you may know. This water was colder than the water in Maine. That's why you see a lot of people in California wearing wetsuits when they go in the water. The Pacific Ocean is very, very cold. This is a picture of the Balboa Yacht Club, and I put it in only to tell a story. There's some big, on either side here, places where the yachts are all moored. Back in the early 70s, when I first went there, contractors could take you out to dinner. That stopped in 1973, From then on, they couldn't even buy you a cup of coffee. But prior to '73, the contractor took me to dinner here, or at least a colleague and myself, to dinner here at the Balboa Yacht Club. Well, when you work for the U.S. government, you go the cheapest way possible, and that includes rent-a-cars. You fly into the airport and you can't go to Avis and Hertz. You have to go almost to fly-by-night rent-a-car companies. And in 1972, I had a beat-up Pinto. It probably had dings in the side, and it was lucky to make it from Los Angeles down to Newport Beach. So my colleague and I said, yes, we would love to go to dinner at the Balboa Yacht Club. And we drove down and all of a sudden realized it was valet parking. And everybody else in line for valet parking either had a Mercedes or a Cadillac or some other high-end vehicle. It was a little embarrassing handing the valet keys to a Pinto. We head north into Los Angeles. This is still I-5. Why, even back in the 70s, I called it the parking lot. You think traffic here in Maryland is difficult? Try driving in Los Angeles. It is a nightmare. Not only from the traffic, but they have lots of these flyovers. And trying to decide which road you want to be on sometimes becomes a little bit challenging. I want to point out that you also see a large concrete structure. During the spring, the mountains to the east of Los Angeles are snow covered and they melt, and they depend upon that to fill their reservoirs. But the excess water runs off and they need a place for it to go, and so you have these dry bed or concrete riverbeds that go from outside of Los Angeles and go down into the ocean. Many of you may have seen some movies where there was cars racing up and down these dry riverbeds. This is Los Angeles. It goes on forever, and it is very, very crowded. Looks very neat. This is flying into LAX or Los Angeles Airport, and it used to blow my mind. You come across very barren mountains, and then all of a sudden you have this mass of humanity. And whether you're flying during the day, like when this picture was taken, or at night where it's just total lights, it is mind-blowing. Hollywood. I'm sure almost everyone listening has seen a picture of this sign. Well, this is Hollywood and Vine. I've only been there once because I thought it was pretty tacky. It's not the image that I had of Hollywood and Vine. That is Beverly Hills in the background. You move down the road just a piece and you do come to the high end of Hollywood. This is the shopping area. You've probably heard of it. It's Rodeo Drive. You also can tell from the cars, pictures, this is not the low end of Hollywood. It's the high end. Yes, I could take you on a tour of this, the rich and famous, and show you lots of mansions. But I wanted to point out just a couple and point out that a lot of the houses are built on hills. In some places, I would call them cliffs. You notice in the foreground of the pictures, they've planted trees in order to hold the earth back because they have lots of erosion, particularly after some of the fires. Note, this house has got its parking lot over what I suppose is their living room. But they have a nice view out over the city and to the Pacific Ocean. These are houses that I would never go in. They're in Hollywood. They're all on stilts. Some of them are a little more sturdy, like the one in the center is on a concrete stilt, but some of them are on wood. Why wouldn't I go in? In the Los Angeles basin, there are almost 10,000 earthquakes a year. Most of them are so small that they're not even felt. Over several hundred are greater than a magnitude of 3.0. And they get about 15 to 20 of them that are greater than 4.0. The standard joke in Los Angeles is that one should buy land in Nevada because that's going to be the future sea line when California slips off into the Pacific Ocean. One thing that might surprise you if you went into some of the suburban communities around Los Angeles and the housing developments, which are tightly packed as you can see, you will see oil wells. The oil wells tended to have been there before they built the houses, by the way. But oil wells continue to abound or about most of the valley. They don't produce large quantities, but they still produce oil in Los Angeles. We start to move out of Los Angeles and go up the coast a little further, and we come to Malibu and some of the beach homes. You get a little further down that beach. I don't know why anybody lives there, because you've got a very tight beach on one side and then you've got a major road on the other. But it's still places that people built multi-million-dollar homes. We're now going to go to one of my favorite parts of Los Angeles. Going up Highway 101, which has another name called California 1. It's a road that's about 350 miles excuse me, long, extending from Los Angeles to San Francisco. As I mentioned, I would go to California between 6 to 8 times a year. I would do my business in the Los Angeles area for a few days, and then I would fly north to San Francisco. And I would always be looking down on this highway, a narrow strip going along the ocean. And I kept saying to myself, I want to drive it. So on one of our vacations, Carol and I did drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco and beyond. And it was a beautiful, beautiful drive. I hope you'll enjoy some of the pictures. We start out, the road is over the other side of those houses in still some of the populated areas, and you can see all the cars lined up along the beach. And you can see, particularly to the left, that these Californians, smart Californians, are wearing wetsuits. The girl on the right is not. These folks are on paddle boards, by the way, if you don't recognize them. It's something that I would love to own, but at 78 years old, I'm a little bit apprehensive about doing it. I want to point out the mountains in the background. In recent years, we've all heard about the fires, particularly in the LA basin. This is where the fires start. Usually they're contained in the mountains, but recently they've come down and affected areas along the beach. Another pretty picture. This is Santa Barbara. Has a lot of Mexican influence. By the way, one of the things I don't have pictures of, but they don't grow grass in Los Angeles. They grow rocks, pebbles. They put rocks out there because you don't have to water the lawn, and water is a commodity that is revered in California. You can see 3 structures out there in the water. Those are drilling rigs. Those are oil wells. As I say, we begin our trip up the coast, which is, as you get a few miles outside of Los Angeles, it starts to become uninhabited. But it is a gorgeous drive along the ocean. Very, very narrow road. And if you're going to do it, I recommend you go from south to north, because you are then looking down over the cliffs into the ocean. If you start out early in the morning, you're likely to hit haze or sometimes fog, but it makes it even more attractive. One of the nice things, there are lots of places that you can stop, get out of your vehicle, and walk some of the beaches. About halfway up the coast, you come upon this large group of structure. It is in the middle of nowhere. And it's called the Hearst Castle, San Simeon. It was conceived by William Randolph Hearst, the publishing tycoon, and his architect, Julia Morgan. It was built in various stages between 1919 and 1947. When he started the project, he bought 40,000 acres for the project. A number of movies have been made here, both within the castle and out amongst the 40,000 acres that goes with the castle. It sits high, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. We continue our journey up along some spectacular scenery. There are a number of bridges. This is probably one of the more famous ones. And I warn you that if you're scared about going over bridges like this, have somebody that does not drive. There are problems with going up Highway 101 or California 1. It is prone to landslides. You may have heard on numerous occasions where the road was closed. At one point it was closed for a whole year because large sections of the road were swept away and into the Pacific Ocean. And it happens when California has heavy rains, and particularly after there have been some forest fires. We now arrive up in an area, Big Sur, Monterey. This particular picture is one that many of you probably have seen on television. It is the golf course known as Pebble Beach. This is probably one of the most photographed trees around. Again, you may have seen it on TV because it is very near Pebble Beach. We're sort of ending our journey along Highway 1, and we're coming up to the San Francisco Peninsula. We're going to be going to downtown San Francisco, which is that area outlined in red. We're going to be coming down the peninsula to what is now known as Silicon Valley, and then up to the top where the orange triangle is to the Napa Valley, famous for wine growing. Welcome to downtown San Francisco. You've probably seen many pictures of San Francisco, and you've seen that pointed building that is in downtown. It is the Transamerica Insurance Building. The building still has the name Transamerica, but the company that built it no longer has its headquarters there. Surprise, surprise, they moved from San Francisco to Baltimore. The bridge in the foreground is not the Golden Gate Bridge. It is the Oakland Bridge, going across the bay to a town called Oakland. The city of San Francisco usually gets, because it's always, many cities around the world have the reputation of being built on 7 hills. Well, San Francisco outdid itself. It's really built on 50 hills. The cable cars there, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but the building in the back is the famous prison Alcatraz. While San Francisco has a subway, it's called MART, and it goes throughout the area over through Oakland and down through the whole peninsula. But people still use the cable cars. What are cable cars? Well, if you look down at the track, you'll see the 2 rails where the cable car runs along. But then in the center, there is another metal thing. Well, a cable constantly runs through that center piece of metal. The motorman, when he wants to go, pulls a lever which grips that cable and moves the car. Now you see people standing on the running boards. The cable cars are relatively small and highly used. And yes, you have to be nimble to get on, and you have to hold on tight. It's not necessarily something I would recommend for a bunch of us here at CLV. A lot of cities around the world have homes called the Painted Ladies. This is a strip of Painted Ladies in San Francisco. I fell in love with these houses way back in the 1960s. San Francisco is famous for its Chinatown. It was here, not in China, that the fortune cookie was first made. There are more than 100,000 people who live in Chinatown in downtown San Francisco. It is the most densely populated neighborhood in the city. But there are other towns. There is a Japantown in San Francisco. I mentioned steep hills. By the way, that's Alcatraz again out in the bay. Note, a little hard to see, but in the lower left part of the picture, the cars are not parked as they are down further in the picture. They're parked sideways because the hills get rather steep. And you want to make sure you're not dependent upon your parking brake. This is the world famous Lombard Street. And yes, it is as curvy as it looks. Those are the same pictures, just trying to get a bigger sense on the one on the right. I have walked down the street, and I have driven down it twice. Only because somebody else in the car wanted to go down again. You will instantly recognize the Golden Gate Bridge. The entrance to San Francisco and the world's largest landlocked harbor. The harbor extends for almost 60 miles, and in places it's between 3 to 12 miles wide. I would point out this area in the foreground of the picture. It is called the Presidio. It's where San Francisco began. It was founded in 1776. It later became a military fort and had flags of Spain, Mexico, and the United States. It was a military base up until 1994. It is now a national park. But I'll point out to you, dense housing that surrounds that park that is part of San Francisco. As you go north over the Golden Gate Bridge, it becomes less dense, and a lot of the people that work in San Francisco go north up into the counties. It's gets very rugged up going up that way. A cartoon type picture of the San Francisco area. Berkeley, famous for its university, a little bit liberal. The square, once again, is depicting where San Francisco is, and the big purple oval is Silicon Valley. I know Silicon Valley pretty well, at least back through the 1980s. My career has been divided perhaps up into three parts. Being in naval aviation, first part. Second part, being a microelectronic engineer. And by circumstance, I don't even want to explain how, I became an expert in the fabrication of microelectronics chips and why, from a physics standpoint, they experience failures. So in the 70s and 80s, I would go to Silicon Valley and be a consultant on behalf of the United States government, helping out companies that were doing business with the government resolve some of their production issues. Some of you know how chips are made, but just in case, I wanted to point out the picture on the lower left is a silicon wafer. When I started out, they were about 2 inches in diameter. Today, they're up to 14 inches in diameter. Silicon wafer is just that. It's pure sand that is heated and produces a large ingot, which is then sliced, polished, and then through a fabrication process, which involves growing oxides and depositing various impurities into the silicon, you grow microchips. The chips are in the upper left portion, and they're cut and broken up. And then they are placed into carriers or holders. And you can see very little wires. Those are actually gold wires that connect it down to what is called a circuit board. The picture on the right is what it looks like inside of your, say, laptop computer. That is a microprocessor, or the central processor of your computer. The large squares on that chip are part of the memory. The rest is the CPU portion of the computer. This is the environment in which I worked. It's an ultra clean environment. One speck of dirt can destroy a processor and on a chip. So it is filtered and filtered and filtered. And everybody wears these kind of clothes with booties and masks. It's required. One of the reasons that Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley is because of this facility. It is Stanford University. Stanford's engineering school had a seed, or was the seed for building all of the complexes that are now called Silicon Valley. It has housed and nurtured students there who went on to become celebrated innovators in the world, but particularly in Silicon Valley. Because it is such a breeding ground for technology, and not only building chips, but the social media type technology, it is the #1 choice of universities in the world. This school gets the most applications from prospective students. There are a number of companies around Silicon Valley. This is the home to Google, a search engine that you may use on your computer. This very strange looking structure is actually the home or headquarters of a company that many of us know, Apple. Apple and its iPhones and its other technology. This is not a high-tech structure. This is Moffett, or what used to be called Moffett Naval Air Station. It's where I first went to Silicon Valley. By the way, that's the end of San Francisco Bay out there in the upper left. Today, and I'll explain why, this is still part of Silicon Valley, but I used to fly in there, and I put it in there for a reason. The building, that strange shaped building over there on the left. During World War II, this was a hangar for blimps, large blimps. Blimps that used to go up and down the West Coast, protecting it from attack during World War II. I went there much later than World War II, flying on an aircraft similar to the one you see in the low left, called a P-3, an anti-submarine warfare aircraft. The picture on the right is the interior of that hangar. You can see the picture on the left, those are clamshell doors that open and close. That building is so big that it is said to have its own weather system in its interior. Today, it is key to technology. Why? Because it is now the site on the West Coast for NASA. No, they don't launch rockets there, but NASA does its National Aeronautic and Space. We tend to forget the aeronautic part, but it's key to be close to the technology that is in Silicon Valley. And so NASA has a major headquarters at what used to be the naval station that I would fly into. We are now going to leave the San Francisco Bay Area, as denoted in this map with the blue circle. Follow the yellow lines. We're going to go up to the Napa Valley and Wine, off to the capital of California, Sacramento, out to Lake Tahoe, which sits on the border of California and Nevada, and then down to Yosemite National Park. This is one of the many wineries in the Napa Valley. There are approximately 600 wineries. While it might look large, they're fairly small. But most of the wineries have places that you can go and do tasting and walk around and see what they do. The vines. Because of the fact that the Napa Valley is famous, people tend to think that most California wines come from the Napa Valley. Only 4% of the wine grown from grapes in California come from the valley. But the valley is very beautiful. Some of the other places that grow grapes are not as pretty. For those of you that drink Gallo wine, Gallo is a major producer of wine in California. This is one of their 3 facilities that make wine. Don't be aghast. Carol and I have toured their facility, and although it looks like you're doing oil wells and producing oil, they produce some low-end wines, but some of their wines are not bad, although mass-produced. We move on to Sacramento. I bring us there. That's the capital of Sacramento. It's a town that prides itself in having the second most number of trees in a capital in the world. Paris, France has the record for the number of trees. Sacramento is famous for something that you may never have heard of. I'm sure you've heard of, but this very fact that it's associated with Sacramento. Excuse me. It was the birthplace of the Pony Express. It was a 1,980-mile mail delivery service that began in 1860 and traveled from Sacramento to St. Joseph, Missouri. One of the parts I like about Sacramento which is a growing large city, is in the downtown area near the Sacramento River, which flows into the San Francisco Bay is they've reconstructed one of the old towns. And it's a neat place to go and spend some time. We now move out of Sacramento, which at its highest point is 16 feet above sea level, up into the mountains. Mountains in the Sierra Nevadas that can go as high as 12 to 13,000 feet. We now are heading east on Interstate 80. Some of you say, well, I've been on Interstate 80 up in Pennsylvania. It's the same Interstate 80 that goes starting in Sacramento and ending in the Hudson River, and it goes across the George Washington Bridge. But I would tell you, if you're going up Interstate 80 in the winter, remember your snow chains. Well, I have snow tires. Remember your snow chains. Look to the right and left of the road. That is where, over the winter, snow has built up and compacted down into ice. This is a treacherous road in the winter. Sorry for this being a little fuzzy, but this is Donner Summit. It's only at a mere 7,000 feet, but some of you may have heard of the Donner Pass. It's where the Donner Party, a group of 89 immigrants who left Illinois and who journeyed west. They got as far as the Donner Pass, and they spent the winter, and they starved. And the story is that they turned to cannibalism to survive. Donner Pass is still a treacherous area. We arrive in Lake Tahoe. It sits high in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It is a lake that is over 2 million years old. It is considered one of the most ancient lakes in the world. It's one of 20 of the oldest lakes scientists have ascertained. 2/3 of it is in California. 1/3 is in Nevada. Those mountains behind are Nevada. It is the second deepest lake in the United States. At its deepest part, it's over 1,700 feet deep. There's a lot of water in that lake. If you could flatten out the entire state of California and take and dump all of the water into that area that constitutes the entire state of California, the water would be 14 inches deep. There are over 39 trillion gallons of water in Lake Tahoe, enough to supply every person in the United States with 50 gallons of water per day for 5 years. An added bonus, it is one of the purest lakes in the world. It has a purity rating of 99.994%. It's also a favorite skiing area of Californians. We now move south, about 100 miles, to again the Nevada-California border and to Yosemite National Park. You'll see various colored lines here. The line and the oval of yellow is Yosemite Valley, and that's where most visitors come to see Yosemite National Park. Well, Carol and I tend to take the roads less traveled, and you'll see a triangle up to the right, and perhaps, I hope on the TV, an orange line which then turns to green. That is a road that is only open for a couple of months in the summer, and it is the road that we took to get to know Yosemite National Park. Again, we're up in the 10,000 foot level, where you see some very rugged lands, rock, beautiful lakes, and alpine forest. This is why the road is only open for about 2.5 months a year. Lots of snow. But during those 2.5 months, it is a beautiful drive. Wonderful, fast-moving streams. And yes, you do get some pretty bad storms still coming in and hitting the Sierra Nevadas. During our trip, which on this particular occasion, we had a small tent and we would camp along the way, drive and camp. And when you camp up at the top of the 10,000 foot level, it's primitive camping. You're out in the middle of nowhere. They give you a table, a place to build a fire, and then a box so the bears don't get your food. But it was a great place to camp, and the weather was just absolutely delightful. A few spots down from us, we met a couple from the Sacramento area who frequently camped in the area. And they said, why don't we take a hike and go back to one of the pristine lakes and do some swimming? Well, we were a little concerned because we had been warned that there are rattlesnakes in Yosemite National Park. But this couple said, oh, no problem. The snakes don't like cold, and so they stay below 7,000 feet. And so you don't find snakes up here at this altitude. So we went for the hike, and we went swimming in this very, very pristine lake. And as we're swimming along, I looked to my right where Carol was swimming, and there was a snake swimming in between us. Needless to say, that snake had not got the message about not being at altitude. We now move down into Yosemite Valley. Yosemite Valley has the tallest waterfall in the lower portion of the United States. That is excluding Alaska. It has a drop of about 2,500 feet. It's also an area that you hear about because it attracts climbers that attack those sheer cliff face. Unfortunately, there are a number of deaths, both of climbers and tourists that get too close to the edge of those cliffs. These are two gentlemen that the world should be thankful for because they worked together to create Yosemite National Park. You can see the waterfalls there to the left. You might recognize the gentleman on the left. This was President Roosevelt. The gentleman on the right his name was John Muir. He's a Scottish immigrant, yay for Scotland, and is famous particularly on the West Coast and all the way up through Alaska and British Columbia of being the champion for the protection of wilderness. Muir convinced the president by bringing him out here and showing him the land to create Yosemite National Park. This is a picture in the valley where most tourists go. Very pristine, very nice. This is Tent City, where most of the tourists stay. There are a lodge and there are some cabins that you can rent, but a lot of people camp. Not necessarily my idea of camping out in the wilderness. During the summer, it is wall-to-wall people. That's why we camped up at the 10,000-foot level. You can go horseback riding down in the valley, and I need to tell you a story. Some of you know that I grew up just outside of New York City, and so part of my education was not learning how to ride a horse. But my wife and my son, who was in 8th grade at the time, was with us on this trip. And they convinced me that we would go for a nice, gentle ride in the valley. And I said yes. So we went down and early in the morning made a reservation to go on to a trail ride, a 2-hour trail ride in the afternoon. And when I made the reservation at the riding stable, I said, "Give me the most gentle horse that you have." "No problem, sir, no problem." So we come back about 1 o'clock in the afternoon for the trail ride. And there are probably about 50 horses there lined up, and as many people going out on this trail ride. So they assign you to horses. Well, they put Carol up at the lead, they put me in the middle, and my son at the back. Almost about the third from the back horse. And so we set off. The cowboys are trained by hands, telling the horses to go on, move out. My horse moves out about 10 feet and decides it does not want to go any further. All of a sudden, I'm in a rodeo on a bucking bronco. It does not want to go forward, and it is trying to go round and jump and try to get me off. At this point, one of the cowboys comes along and he yells something at the horse. The horse doesn't move, and he takes a whip and he hits it on the rear end. At that point, we went from the bucking bronco to full speed ahead across this open field, with me hanging on for dear life. We catch up with the other horses. Now I am the last horse in the long trail of 50, a group of 50 horses. And my horse decides it does not like the horse that is in front of him, so it's biting the horse's rear. Well, needless to say, the horse in front of him did not like that, and he's kicking his back legs back at my horse. The trail hand is saying, "Keep his head towards the horse or else you'll get your leg broken." That continued on for about an hour, by the way. But then we started going over, not bridle paths, but through rocky paths like shown in this picture, and past trees where the horse is trying to rub me off of the saddle. And it got treacherous and it got dangerous because some of the horses up in front, we were going through shale type areas and they fell. Not something a naive person who never had ridden before in his life, and by the way, after this, never rode again. But we get about an hour and a half into and they decide to bring me up to the head of the line. And they decide to get me off of the horse, and they took the saddle off and the saddle blanket, and lo and behold, they found a big briar right underneath the saddle blanket. No wonder this horse was trying to get me off his back. So they put it back up, they put me up on the head, but now the horse realizes it's going back to the riding stable. And instead of trying to buck me off, it's trying to go as fast as it can back to the riding stable. As I said, that was my last horse riding experience. We now leave Yosemite National Park and go through some very beautiful alpine areas heading south to the Sierra Nevadas. We now come to the Sequoia National Park. California is known to the giant sequoia. There are these large trees, redwood trees, but there are several species of redwoods. Some of the bigger ones, and you're going to see some big ones in this park, are actually up in Northern California, coastal redwoods. The giant sequoia is the highest living organism on Earth. It is the world's most massive tree. It is also one that has a very long lifespan. Tree can last between 1,800 to 2,700 years. This is the largest tree in the park. It's called the General Sherman. It is the largest known living single stem, emphasize single stem tree on the Earth. It has a bore volume of about 53,000 cubic feet. When we were there, its height was 275 feet and had a diameter of 25 feet. It's still living. It is about 2,600 years old. These are some of the other redwood trees in the park, and you get a feel for their height by looking at the people who are walking next to them. We now move out of the Sierra Nevadas into the central part of California, the Central Valley. Town down the bottom there, Bakersfield. I always tease my daughter-in-law. She got her start in television as a television reporter in Los Angeles, a small station, but then moved on to Bakersfield, which is usually the butt of the jokes in California, because it's out in a farming area. So she got her experience starting in Bakersfield, California. Anyway, this is the Valley of Central California, and it is extremely important to the U.S. economy, and it is extremely important to even us here at Carroll Lutheran Village. The valley is 400 miles long. It's level. It is the most productive agricultural region in the world. It does so because there is a river that runs through it, again runs all the way up to San Francisco Bay, that provides the moisture. It is a valley because you have the Sierra Nevada mountains to the east, and to the west going out toward the Pacific Ocean, there is another series of coastal mountains. You can see the river, not a big river, but it produces a lot of water, and then the canals pumped up and out into the fields. Yes, this is the lettuce when it's green. It's not necessarily green when we get it here, but it's the green lettuce. California is the most biologically diverse state in the United States. It has more than 400 plants and numerous animal species. Over 1/3 of the United States vegetables come from this valley, and 2/3 of the fruits and nuts. Farms and ranches in the area receive almost $50 billion in cash receipts for their output. The state's agriculture produces almost 40 different commodities. One of the things that we don't think about is California is the largest economy in the United States. We now move from the Central Valley across the Sierras a little bit to the Mojave Desert. A high desert. It's a high desert because there are mountains that protect or stop the moisture from coming in from the Pacific Ocean into this area. It's over 25,000 square miles. It occupies 1/6 of the land in California. It's famous for Death Valley. It is the hottest and driest place on Earth. It is also the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere. But it's home to this tree. Yes, that's not a piece of dead tree. That is a live tree. It's known as the Methuselah tree. It's an ancient brisk-cone pine. It is the oldest known organism on Earth. It is close to 5,000 years old. We go further south, actually just maybe about 120 miles west of Los Angeles. And you can see in the background, high desert. This is Palm Springs, vacation home to the rich and famous. At least that's what I thought. You can see the desert type mountains that surround it, and a lake. It has a number of lakes, but all of them are artificial, the result of water coming down from those mountains. When I first drove into Palm Springs, I was amazed. It sits in between, it's in a valley sitting between two massive mountains or hills. And surrounding this city and this valley are hundreds and hundreds of windmills that generate electricity. I was deeply disappointed in going to downtown Palm Springs. It was pretty tacky, to be blunt. Most of the people that have rich and famous houses are on the outskirts. We now move back. We've come almost full circle, and we're back in Orange County, Anaheim to be specific, and Disneyland. Orange County got its name because at one point in time it was one of the largest areas of growing oranges in the country. Then in 1955, Disneyland opened. The picture on the left is taken, aerial picture was taken in 1955, and that area you can see Disneyland. If you look to both the top and the part of the picture, you'll still see some green. Those are orange trees. And that's the way Disneyland looked. Rather rural with lots of orange trees. The picture on the right where the circle or the oval is Disneyland today. The orange trees are gone. What you now have are all these houses. It is a densely populated area. And that's why when Disney built in Florida, he went and bought up lots and lots of land in Orlando so that it would not be surrounded by housing developments. We end by not going out to Highway 101, but going all the way in the northern part of California, up near the Oregon state line. I wanted to show you it's just as beautiful in the northern part. Hopefully in the next couple of months I'm going to be doing a presentation on the Pacific Northwest, and we once again will look at the Pacific Ocean. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. We appreciate it. I will be doing a presentation. I'm going to try to do one every 4 to maybe 6 weeks. They take a little bit of time to put together, but I really enjoy doing them, and I hope that you enjoy listening to them. Thank you again. Stay safe. Keep your masks on.